you, Professor Andrew Loblaw, for joining us in Australia and making the long trip from Toronto to Adelaide. It's a pleasure to have you here at ANZUP 2022 and for joining me in ANZUP in Conversation. My name's Amy Hayden. I'm a radiation oncologist from Sydney. And firstly, I was hoping if you could introduce yourself for our audience.
Great to be here, Amy, and thanks for having me aboard. So I'm a radiation oncologist. I've been at Toronto Sunnybrook Regional Cancer Centre, or Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre, for 22 years. There I lead the GU oncology program with my medical oncologist, and we're a pretty big group. We have 11 radiation oncologists just in GU. We have 30 total in our group. And we treat about 2,000 patients a year in our GU center. And we put about a third of those on trial, so about 600 patients per year go on clinical trial. By way of training, I'm physics, and bachelor's in physics, did my medicine at a university called Queen's, and then I did a clinical epidemiology degree, so I have a master's in research methods as well.
That's quite a varied background, the physics and the research methods as well, and that actually leads straight into my next question. You've had great success in developing clinical trials at the unit, and having up to a third of patients on clinical trials is an amazing percentage. What factors do you think have contributed to that success? What skills have been useful, and how did you develop those skills?
So I think first and foremost, I think it's a team game. Like, all of us in our group have kind of taken the lead to look at one area. So for example, my colleague Jared Morton is our brachytherapist lead, and there's 4 of us who do brachytherapy, but he and the others would take the lead on a certain project. Another would take the lead on salvage brachytherapy, for example. Another would take the lead on post-op. So it's not like we have a hierarchy system. We kind of have this distributed, equal team members, so that any one member can take their own project, and we all support each other. So I think that's been one of our main reasons for success. The other is we have this culture of curiosity. So we always like to learn, everyone likes to learn, but we feel that we're best able to learn in the context of clinical trials, as opposed to just doing something and then figuring out later in a retrospective chart review whether that worked or not. And the last thing I think that's been really helpful is that we've always had these very small studies, like 30 patient studies, and we've used these like little testing grounds. And so we come up with an idea, like when we started SBRT, for example, we had never given 7 gray per day. So there was some evidence from the radiobiologist that might be a good thing to do. So we thought, well, let's try it, but let's start out at a small number of patients. And then from each of these little trials, we tried to figure out what we learned from them and take that to the next generation trial. And so some trials, for example, we'd say, well, that didn't work very well, so let's maybe do a different immobilization device. Or that worked really well, let's use that in the next trial. And we've used that, as you'll see in my next talk, to go from 39 fractions down to 2 fractions of radiotherapy.
Yeah, which is an amazing development over time. In that process of developing trials and taking it each time to the next iteration, how do you bring in the consumer or patient voice in terms of what might be important to them in terms of deciding what's the next step and how to design the next trial?
So we have a lot of volunteers at work. We're very grateful to have men who are survivors in our clinics helping patients with decisions. So we get a lot of feedback from them, both in terms of the new patients that are coming through, but also their own lived experiences. And we also give a lot of talks with the different groups in our community. And so we do hear a lot of, oh, this is important to me, or I wish I knew this better or earlier, or I wish you could come up with a better treatment that didn't have as much sex. So I mean, it's not too hard to guess that men want less sexual side effects or any side effects whatsoever. But then really hearing that patient voice.
Sure.
So it's really about teamwork.
Yeah, fantastic. And do you have any advice for young investigators who are aspiring clinical trialists as to how to develop their career and become a successful clinical trialist?
I kind of fell upon what we're doing, and it just, in retrospect, learned to put together what we were doing in a formalized manner. Like, as we were going for promotion, for example, they would ask you, what's your vision? And I'm like, vision? So now I'm actually telling my trainees, come up with a personal vision. Come up with something that you are passionate about, something where you feel you can make a contribution. And then anything that aligns with that, go full force. Anything that doesn't,
that's wonderful advice.
Right? And anything that doesn't, because we always have trouble saying no, right? Yeah. But if it doesn't align with your personal vision, if you want to go west, for example, and someone says, hey, let's go east, you're like, no, it's okay, I respect east, but I'm going west.
Fantastic.
Right? And then you'll also find yourself with like-minded people because you've clarified and been thoughtful about what exactly you want to do. And then I find it should hopefully be a more linear process because you're just putting one foot in front of the other. It's maybe not an exact straight line, but you know, as long as you're going west or north or whatever, if you're saying my goal is to go northwest, you stop every once in a while and say, well, where are we? Where we want to go? Are we on track? And then you can course adjust, right? Just as you're driving a car or sailing a boat or something like that. But that's my advice to young investigators is figure out what drives you, what's your passion, right? And it doesn't have to be about writing papers or grants. That stuff will take care of itself.
This is a bit of an unfair question because you've given us so much information in your talks and for the talk to come. If you were going to give us one or two key take-home points from your talks about prostate cancer for people who were not at ANZUP, what would they be?
So I think really it's multidisciplinary care. I think that's the main thing. We chatted about that yesterday in the session. Really it's about respecting, again, that patient, what their needs are. And it's hard to make decisions if you don't know what you don't know. And so, you know, I think we're best working as a multidisciplinary team as collaborators. And I find it's, you know, like I said, we started this clinic 15 years ago. And instead of feeling like I'm butting heads with my surgeon, I feel like we're working together now. And we're, again, on that path together. And maybe they proportionally don't do as many surgeries as they did before, but we're so busy that they can't actually keep up with the surgery itself. So I would say multidisciplinary care and it's actually a much nicer place to work when we're working together.
It's always nice when you get along with your colleagues.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would say is if we could reduce the cost and bureaucracy associated with trials, then we would really accelerate that learning process faster. There's just so much, I won't say gum in the system, there's appropriate regulatory, not barriers, but processes, let's put it that way. But it shouldn't take 7 months to get a legal agreement between two centers that have worked before. That's all I'm saying. So maybe we could use something like AI to come up with clinical trial agreements. There was just like the center, and we're going to collect biologics and maybe share some data, blah, blah, blah. And then, boop, at the end of the day, it's done.
Fantastic. I think that's a great idea. Looking at patterns of care in Australia, brachytherapy utilisation for prostate cancer has significantly decreased over time. What's your view on that and how it fits with SBRT, and what are the patterns of care in Canada?
So we have very similar challenges in Canada, maybe not as dramatic as I've heard in Australia, and certainly talking to my colleagues in Sydney and in Melbourne. US has the same pressures, and I think a lot of it has to do with brachytherapy. It's a very important but very fragile treatment technique because you need 7 different things, including 4 different expert personnel, all to be working at the same time to make it work. So I think it does have a role. My own feeling is that if we can show that SBRT is non-inferior to brachytherapy, my hope is that more men will get SBRT, but we'll prove that that's the right thing to do. Because right now we just suspect it's the right thing to do, but that's not the same as a proper randomized study.
And on that note, congratulations on getting the funding for the Ascend SBRT trial. And hopefully we'll be able to
in a decade we'll know.
We'll know the answer, and hopefully we'll be able to recruit patients in Australia as well.
Yeah, we'd love that.
That would be fantastic.
Lovely collaboration. We've done some really great work together. There was that SC24, which was the spine SBRT study. That was great collaboration between Canada
and going back to that profit before that.
And profit before that, of course. Right. So we have a long history of working together, and we look forward to working more
That's
together.
right. One of the other patterns or change in patterns in Australia, which has gone the other direction, has been the rapid adoption of PSMA PET scans, probably in advance of evidence to support its use and benefit. What's been the situation in Canada, and also how do we incorporate next generation imaging, including PSMA PET scans, into clinical trial design?
Right. So we are well behind you guys, but we're learning from you. In terms of our PET scan, we have a big registry in the province of Ontario where patients, generally in the recurrent setting, but also castrate-resistant setting, are allowed access to a PSMA PET scan. We use the DP, I can never say it, the pill.
Yes.
One, and then we now have one in the de novo setting, and we're using the 00, I call it 007, but it's the 1007.
Yep.
And that one's cleared by the gastrointestinal tract mainly, so it allows us to see the nodules within the prostate.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really about, again, asking that question, like, what is the role of novel imaging in this situation? For example, how do we, if we see conventional imaging is negative and a PSMA positive node in the back of the abdomen, how do we treat that patient? Should we put them on lifelong ARATs? I don't think we do. And so again, we're starting, one of my previous fellows, Rachel Glucksman, who's now at Princess Margaret, we went to Astellas actually and said, we're going to give a year of hormones and SBRT to the node, and you sponsor a trial that will randomize us to enzalutamide for that year. So it's like an intermittent ARAT. Because I don't think a guy with a single lymph node needs lifelong therapy, but we'll find out.
Well, it's been wonderful talking to you today, Professor Loblaw. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
and as you
me.
said, I think there's a lot of scope for collaboration between Australia and Canada moving forward.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Great to meet you. And yes, I think we have a lot of like-minded goals. So look forward to future success.
Thank you.